Welcome to Marfa Public Radio, 93.5 on your FM dial. KRTS, this is Jason Kolker. I'm sometimes known by my nickname Oslo. And welcome to Talk at 10. We are here with Tom Hardy, a local at one time, and now he's living in Fort Stockton and in Florida sometimes. He has just written a book called Slow Moving Dreams. It's a novel, but if you're from these parts, you're going to see a lot that is quite real and a lot that you'll recognize. The title, The Slow Moving Dreams, comes from, I think, a Willie Nelson song.
Willie Nelson song, My Heroes Have Always Been Cowboys.
Right, now, let's deal with that song real quick. That was a big hit in 1979 from a movie called The Electric Horseman.
It was.
And as I recall the movie, it was a cowboy who was frustrated with the corporateness of cowboyness, right?
Exactly, and he stole a prize horse and ran away with it, and most of the movie people were chasing him in. Willie Nelson was actually an actor in that movie.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, he was one of the characters.
Well, your book touches on some of those themes. It has a lot more, including childhood, and we'll get to that in a second. But I want to deal with the title. I come from Los Angeles. A dream in Los Angeles is, she's pretty, let's get married, or that car looks cool, I want to buy that. And these are dreams that are very pronounced, and you achieve them very quickly with a bang, hopefully. And somehow they, if we're to believe the cliche and the stereotype, but I'll tell you it's the truth, somehow if they work out, they leave you a little bit empty. So those are fast-moving dreams, and I don't think there's any lack of songs about fast-moving dreams. But you're talking about slow-moving dreams, and what would those be, for example?
Well, it's basically a story that takes place in the 1950s and 60s in West Texas and deals with our parents before that. But at that day and time, everything moved slower. We were not into instant gratification, and most of the people, in terms of their dreams, they planned on a long time working before they achieved those dreams. We didn't have the instant communication that we have now, so people just naturally assumed that things were going to take longer, and so we were a little bit relaxed about what we dreamed of, what we expected to obtain, and how long it was going to take us to get them. And then when Willie Nelson did the song about cowboys and talk about one step in back of their slow-moving dreams, that title always stuck with me. It just seemed to fit the culture that I grew up in Alpine and Fort Stockton.
I got the line here, though if you know the song, you can just hum it to your head and you'll get the line. But it's sadly, well, I'll say it, I won't sing it, sadly in search of, but always in back of themselves and their slow-moving dreams. And if you're to listen to that song only, you'd think that there's something melancholy about having those dreams. Like there's something that's kind of holding you back and tomorrow never comes. If you're to read your book, if you're to read Slow Moving Dreams by Tom Hardy, who's our guest, you would see that maybe the guys with the slow-moving dreams choose them intentionally, and maybe they are making the right decisions.
Well, that's part of the story in the book. What the main character is wrestling with that, did I make the right decision by going for the fast-moving dreams, as you talk about, or would I have been better off if I had stayed with the slow-moving dreams of the cowboy culture in West Texas? And he's wrestling with that. And the people that stayed in Alpine and Fort Stockton that had the slow-moving dreams turned out to be the people that had the happiest and most fulfilling lives in a lot of ways. So it's not a negative. It's not a negative at all. I don't want to say that it's better than people who go to Los Angeles and have the fast-moving dreams. It's different. It fits the culture and the people of West Texas, and the people who take that path are very satisfied. So, it's not a negative at all. Even though the song was sort of a sad song, it was a song that was sad for a time that's past, as opposed to the guys who lived it were not sad. The guy was sad that those times have gone.
Let's unpack this a little bit. You're in your 50s?
I'm in my 60s.
You're your 60s. Well, you're a strong-looking man, and you say you're about 6'4.5".
Yep.
The guy in the book is 6'5", so there's no relationship there, I'm sure.
No.
But in truth, the book is very biographical.
There's quite a bit of my life in there, and that's yes, that's correct. There's a lot of my life in there. I won't say it's autobiographical in its entirety, but a lot of the things that are in the book were my experiences growing up, my experiences in coaching. The main character, like me, had pursued a career in coaching immediately after college. He was an athlete in college, and like a lot of old athletes, and I touch on this in several places in the book, although it's not a main theme. It's very hard to leave that culture and go to a culture that's totally separate from it. So the character in the book had trouble making the transition, but he did make the transition and leave coaching. So yes, there's quite a bit of my experience in that.
But it's not just coaching, it's a general theme of leaving home. And here I am telling you about your book, but
Right.
This is the way it came to me. It's the idea that there are certain places that rejuvenate, kind of charge your batteries. And if you're wise enough, you'll know that from the beginning. If you're not wise enough, you got to go out into the open world and kind of get the frustration that it brings you, and then you realize it. And so, sure, there's the coaching, which you tried and were disillusioned with, but it was something that you knew like the back of your hand and loved.
Right.
But more than that, and this is what I'm very interested in, there was this area. There was Alpine, Marfa, Fort Davis, Balmorhea, all this area which seems to fit your character in such a way that it cradles him almost. And folks, just to let you know, the big city here, the evil big city here is not New York. It's not Los Angeles. It's Austin, Texas, which came to me as a bit of a shock too.
Well, still call it evil. I've still got friends in Austin. They may not be too happy. May not be too happy about that characterization. Let's just call it the big city.
Mm-hmm. But it's portrayed as a big city with complications.
Compared to Fort Stockton, Alpine, Balmorhea, it is a very big city.
Right.
The thing that I was trying to talk about was place for sure, but more than that, I wanted to talk about the power of family and extended family and how that affects our lives. There was a time when I was a kid, and probably when you were a kid, when families didn't scatter all over the place. They stayed pretty much in the same area. Siblings would live in the same area. They would continue to get together. And so when they had children, which would be cousins, the cousins were all raised in close proximity to one another. So when they grew up, they had this extended family and the support system. When I was growing up in Alpine, I was lucky enough that we had 4 sets of cousins that were living there at that time. There was 3 brothers and a sister, our parents that lived there. And then we had other cousins that came from Fort Stockton and Pecos to stay with us. So we were lucky enough to grow up not only with our parents and uncles in close proximity, but every day we had a group of kids that were basically our same age that we grew up with, we played with, we supported one another, we loved one another, we were family. And people, I'm not sure that exists much anymore. I know my own kids. My wife and I have, between us, we have 10 brothers and sisters. They all have 2 or 3 kids, which makes a pool of about 30 cousins. But yet my kids barely know their cousins because we're scattered from Pennsylvania to Oklahoma to Florida, and they very seldom ever see one another. So we've lost that extended family type of raising that we had, but back before we become so mobile. And I sort of wistfully think about that. And the culture in West Texas and Alpine very much fit that sort of family environment. So that's one of the themes that I wanted to talk about in the book was the extended family, the family support type of thing.
Let's get wistful. I have no problem with that. Let's say I want you to tell us maybe about the Balmorhea trip or a Fort Davis trip where everyone gets in their cars. The kids are put in their car seats and they're listening to Baby Mozart and something. Is that how it was?
Not exactly.
So tell us how.
This was before car seats were invented, and they didn't play much Mozart in West Texas. It was more Hank Williams at that time. But what my parents and their brothers and sisters would do is we would pick a weekend and we would all drive up into the Davis Mountains. Those of us that lived in Alpine would come from here. We'd all get together and caravan up there Friday afternoon after our parents got off work. The ones in Pecos would drive from Pecos and meet us. The ones from Fort Stockton we would meet at a particular roadside park that's up there in the Davis Mountains. And we would camp.
Do you remember exactly where it was?
I
People
do.
here will recognize it. So tell us.
It's still there. It's on the other side of Fort Davis, just short of Wild Rose Pass. There's a creek that runs across the road there, and there's a roadside park that has about 4 eating places with the park benches and everything. And that's where we would go. And it was big enough that each one of us could get a little area, and we would camp out for the weekend.
How old were you?
Let's see, I would have been 8, 9, 10 years old at
Okay.
that time. And most of my cousins were between 7 and 12 years old. So there would be 12 to 15 of us running around all over the place. And, you know, we would meet there and we would camp there and we would play where we were camped. And then during the day, some of the adults would drive us down to the Balmorhea swimming pool, and we would go swimming all day in the open air or the open pool there in Balmorhea. Come back at night, eat around the campfire, tell stories, sing cowboy songs, and sleep under the stars. You know, and I look back on that as one of the greatest times of my life.
Well, you know, that's the time when the good things definitely stay imprinted. So you were actually fortunate to absorb those good things, to have them occur way back in age 6 through 10. That's
Yeah.
when they stay with you.
Yeah.
You tell a story, and I want to get to one of the things that is singular, or not singular, but one of the things that distinguishes your book is that it has a certain jukebox feel to it. It's got its own soundtrack, and we'll get to that in a second. But you tell a story about Balmorhea, which I find very interesting, and makes me think that the pool used to be deeper than it is now. Is that right?
Well, it sure seemed that way to 10-year-olds. There is a place in the Balmorhea pool where they've got a real cable stretched across the pool. And on one side is the 3-4 feet deep area where all the kids play. And on the other side, it gets down to some places maybe 20 feet deep. And we used to go up to that wire and, you know, go under submerged and look down into the dark. And it looked like it was just going off and, you know, to the bottom of the ocean. And of course, we thought the creatures from the Black Lagoon lived down there. We were scared to death of the dark water there. But at that time, it did have a division. I'm sure it still does. But there's one side for kids and one side for adults. And, you know, we all lived for the time we got old enough to swim on the other side of the wire.
Right. Though the curse of being an adult is sometimes you think like the swimming pools for doing laps. And when you're a kid, the swimming pool is just for having fun.
Exactly. We used to play, you know, King of the Inner Tube and things like that. And it was a fun thing. It was a play thing. And like I said, when you had 10 or 12 cousins together playing, screaming and hollering and making a big mess, it was a lot of fun.
Do you remember Marfa, Texas from your childhood?
I do. I remember Marfa. One thing I remember about Marfa is when they filmed Giant here. We actually came over here, and they had the actors. I believe it was over here at the Paisano Hotel. I believe I was about 6 years old. I don't remember exactly when they filmed that, but they had at the time they had Elizabeth Taylor, Rock Hudson, James Dean, Carol Baker, Sal Mineo, and Chill Wills all standing together.
Huh.
And so Chill Wills, the only guy I'd ever seen. He was in a lot of the old cowboy movies, so I knew who he was. So I almost pushed Elizabeth Taylor out of the way to go get Chill Wills' autograph.
That wouldn't have happened 10 years later.
No, it wouldn't have
Pushing him out
happened
of the way.
later. But at that time, Chill Wills, he was a cowboy movie star. So I got his autograph, and I've still got that somewhere from all those years back. But we did come to Marfa, and then later when I was in high school, we used to come over here and play sports against the Marfa team. So we spent a lot. And of course, you know, we all went to Sul Ross and went out and looked at the Marfa lights and tried to figure out what it was. And so I've spent quite a bit of time in Marfa.
When was the last time you were here?
Let's see, last summer I was here. We came over and brought some family over. We went out to see the Marfa lights, and that night they didn't show up. So no one believes me that there's lights.
Don't
there
even
now.
get me started. That's a different interview. Well, I have a question for you. Given what part of the magic of your book, frankly, the book takes place in 2004 in Alpine, Texas. Let me turn myself down here. Alpine, Texas really hasn't changed that much, and it hasn't grown. But I suspect Marfa has more of a change if you're just coming in here.
Marfa, the culture in Marfa has changed a lot from when I was a kid. As you say, Alpine is pretty much the same as it was. It still has the cowboy culture for the most part and the Sul Ross culture. Marfa has changed from that sort of environment more to an arts community, which is interesting. I've not spent enough time here to get deeply involved in it, but it's a very interesting change from the West Texas culture that used to be here. Fort Davis seems to be pretty much the same. Fort Stockton hadn't changed at all.
This has nothing to do with your book, and you're not a pronounced authority on demographics and city planning, but would you, if you were in Marfa now, or if you wanted to retain this feel that you had when you were a kid, which was probably about 50-some years ago, would you think a train stopping here would be a good thing or a bad thing?
Oh, I think it'd be a great thing.
Okay.
That's one of the things that I miss from my childhood is train travel. When we were very young and lived in Alpine, my dad was in the service for a while, and we would get on the train in Alpine and take the train to Austin to see my dad. And That was until a couple of years ago was the last time I'd been on a train. My wife and I took a train trip up the East Coast just so that I could do it one more time before trains disappeared. I hope they're making a comeback, and I think it would be great if they had a depot here where the trains would stop.
It's a mystery to me, and I think a lot of people here, why the train stopping in Marfa, if it will start again. And the whole nature of train travel in the United States seems to have become kind of a joyride. It's not really an effective transportation form.
Yeah, that's just, when we took the trip up the East Coast, it was a joyride.
Well, yeah, what did you mention about Alpine in the book? That was the last stop of... Go ahead.
At that time, it was the last stop before you got to El Paso.
Right, and that made a lot of difference.
It did.
Yeah.
It
And
did.
it made Alpine special, made it significant. Like your last stop.
It had a lot to do with the growth, and the two railroads intersected there, and the one from the north, and the one from the east and west, they intersected at Alpine. So it kind of made it a crossroads, and it was, that helped a lot in terms of the growth of the town.
We could. I have a whole list of stuff we could talk about. I'm just going to push in some stuff before we run out of time that I thought was pretty cool, pretty important. You yourself are not a cowboy.
I'm not.
But you come from a cowboy family, definitively. And you kind of, I don't know if I'm putting too focused a point on this, but it seems that there is this clear distinction between the purity of cowboy living and what you deal with as an executive of hospitals in Austin somewhere. Am I making that too clear, or is that correct?
No, that was one of the frustrations as I got further and further away from Alpine and the cowboy culture, is that most of what I was doing, for example, when I was the CEO of a hospital, all I did all day long was give people permission to do what they were going to do anyway. I actually produced nothing of any value, and I had nothing at the end of the day to show for what I did.
Yeah.
Whereas guys like my cousins that had stayed out here and were working with their hands, at least at the end of the day, they could show, I did this. This is what I did. I can touch it. I can feel it. I can be proud of it. So I was always frustrated by the clarity of what they did versus what I did was not clear. I was always kind of fascinated with the fact that the people out here, particularly the ranch culture people, have almost like a code of ethics and behavior that they live by. For example, be a good neighbor. You have to be a good neighbor when your next neighbor is 50 miles away and you may need help, so you better be on good terms with your neighbors. So if your neighbors need help, you go and help them. You don't ask, well, what do you need? Maybe I'm going to be busy. You say, sure, I'll be there. When I was growing up out here, if somebody said, hey, I need some help next weekend, we're going to be branding or whatever, and, people would all go there and help.
Well, I have an observation about that as well, which is that it's not, the good neighbor part certainly is true, but if you work very closely with the land, whether you're a cowboy or a gardener, nature has rules that are fixed. Mm-hmm. They're not imposed by policemen. If you go too fast on your horse, you'll pay. If you stay out past a certain hour, it's going to get really cold, really fast. All this type of stuff. And so there are certain, in a life that is close to nature, there are certain axioms which are just so deeply embedded in you that you have a life that has, as you say, would you say rules or?
You almost have a guidebook.
You almost
for
have
life.
you almost have a guidebook. Whereas if you live in the city, you're constantly playing with nature. These things, I can stay up all night because the lights are on. It's warm, and I got this record player, whatever.
I've got air conditioning. I've got heating. They're going to plow the roads. I can go to town, do whatever I want to do any time of the year.
Now, you bonked me on the head, and you probably would if I give a spoiler here, but I'm going to talk about Son and that he died. He dies fairly early on in the book. And Son, that's S-O-N, is the nickname of a cowboy character in this book. And there was something that really struck me about this. Normally, when you just want to describe a guy who's content, you talk about his life and how he enjoys it and wouldn't part from it. And you do that with this guy, with this cowboy named Son. But you did something that I thought was very skillful in introducing us to a deep character, which is you talk about how he died and how he had a certain contentment in his death. He dies of a heart attack, which could happen to any of us. But he dies of a heart attack doing his daily stuff, what he does every single day, and yet that seems to fit him and work for him.
Yeah, the character, he had what most of would call a very good day. He spent the day doing what he loved, enjoying every minute of it, and then on his way home, he dropped dead. So, he died the way he lived. He died doing what he always wanted to do at the end of a very good day for him. So, most of us would say, gosh, I hope I can, when my time comes, I hope I can die a death like that when I'm happy, I've had a great day, and I'm doing what I want to do. I think all of us would like that. Very few of us are going to get that, but
Yeah,
all
I
of
think
us,
you're right.
all of us would love to have that kind of a death.
Well, we got the 8-minute warning here, so I'm going to prep you with a question. You'll answer it at the end, and then I'm going to talk about the soundtrack. The question I want to ask you is, this book suggests a lot of longing on part of the main character that maybe he hadn't gone all the way around the merry-go-round just to come back home. And I'm going to ask you if that's the way you feel as well. But you work on that in your deep subconscious, and I want to ask you about your music career. Do you play or listen to music a lot? Because this book has a soundtrack like you wouldn't believe.
It does. It's a lot of music is woven into the story. And music was important to us when we were growing up here because we listened to the radio all the time. And so there was always a country music station, and we were listening to country music all the time. I am not much of a singer or anything like that. I play the trombone. I still play the trombone in
That's not a very country music.
It's
not a cowboy instrument.
It's not a cowboy instrument at all, but
It doesn't even fit on a horse.
I was the worst guitar player and the worst singer in our family. But I could play the trombone, so I still do that, playing in a community band there where I live and love music. And, it's once you've had that music all day long and music involved in everything you do, it's kind of hard you don't want to walk away from it. It's not just hard, you don't want to walk away.
And I'll tell you something about radio days, so to speak. And now you go back a bit further when radio was the only way you were going to hear a song.
Right.
I go back to records, to vinyl records. But nonetheless, there was a certain community knowledge of music. We all knew the same stuff. Mm-hmm. There may have been lots and lots of different styles and genres of music out there, but the radio could only play one at a time, and we were all tuned into that same station. So in your book, there's music played at funeral, and you go through the lyrics. There's music played when you're camping with cousins. You go through the lyrics, and everyone knows the same stuff.
Right.
I don't know if that's true today.
I don't think so. I don't know the lyrics of the stuff my kids listen to. I'm not sure you could hear the lyrics, a lot of that stuff, if you could discern the lyrics.
Right.
But, that's one of the great things about country music is that you can hear what they're saying. They're telling a story. And a lot of times the story will relate to what you do, so you can kind of, you feel like they're talking about you. So music was important to us in West Texas. We weren't a lot of us are musicians. We didn't have a lot of opportunities for live music and stuff like that, but we did have the radio. And then as I got a little older, we had Roy Orbison, who grew up over in Wink. He was singing, and Buddy Holly was up in Lubbock singing.
Did you see Buddy Holly?
I did. And,
you saw Buddy Holly. Tell us about that. Okay.
Well,
the themes have changed.
The themes have changed. Well, the great thing is when I was in high school, getting away from Buddy, but when I was in high school, Roy Orbison was growing up in Wink, Texas, and he played for dances at Fort Stockton High School when I was there. I think either our junior or senior prom had Roy Orbison and the Teen Kings was the act. And, of course, at the time, we thought, gosh, that guy can sing pretty good.
Yeah, well, you were right.
And we didn't know anything about him. He was kind of a goofy-looking guy.
Was he singing?
Man, he could sing.
Was he singing rock and roll then?
He was.
Because he started as a rockabilly guy.
He did, a rockabilly guy. His big song at that time was Brown-Eyed Handsome Man.
And tell me about Buddy Holly. This is a question I've often asked people who've seen rock and roll acts in the mid-'50s. Did you think that, wow, this is the loudest music I've ever heard?
Yeah, basically, I thought this is the loudest and the craziest racket. It took me a while to get into it. If you've grown up listening to Hank Williams and then all of a sudden you hear Buddy Holly, but it was infectious. The rhythm and the beat and the way he was singing, it was infectious. And before long, we were all going around singing, Buddy Holly songs. And
did you think to yourself, these are Texans, this is Texan music, or did you think this is rock and roll from these city guys?
No, we thought they were West Texans, and so they were, this is cool. West. We owned them. They were West Texas boys, West Texas music.
By the way, I have to ask, did you see Elvis?
No, didn't see Elvis.
Okay. All right, I just have to digest that. So this is a book, it has some kind of Disney-esque themes about identity and stuff like that, but it also has some darker stuff involving guns and hangings and stuff like that. And it has a certain tough guy feel to it. You have a certain tough guy look to you. Do you think this is written in a tough guy way? I'm not saying like Hemingway necessarily,
No.
but austere with.
No, what I really wanted to try to get into and talk about was kind of the power of anger and hate that can go across generations. In the use my dad for example. In the book, we talked about some of the characters' parents had been in foster homes back during the Depression, and that apparently happened to a lot of kids during the Depression. Their parents couldn't afford to take them on the road to try to find work, so they would leave them with a farm family, send money if they could, but more than that, the kids became labor. And in many cases, these kids were abused, and my father was abused terribly while he was working at a farm at a foster home. And he had told me those stories, and that anger passed from him to me. And for years, I would, think, man, I've got to find a way to get back up there and get back at those people for what they did to my dad. I, finally not totally let go of it. I'm still mad about it, but I don't think about revenge so much now. My mother, her ancestors were Cherokee, and it's been almost 200 years since the Trail of Tears, and we're still mad about that. So these anger, they carry on over generations. And in the book, the characters, the kids, become aware of a wrong done to their parents. And like their parents, they have to make a decision. Are we going to deal with this and carry on, or are we going to let it go? And it's a very tough decision, both for their parents and for them. Old angers, old hurts are very hard to let loose of. And so we struggle with that.
Well, old angers, that's a story of the United States, reconciling and dealing with them. Right. As far as the book, though, is concerned, is it a guy's book, do you think?
Well, some people have said that. I personally think it can be, anybody's book. A lot of the characters in the book are female characters. It's written more from a guy's point of view, but I would like to think that anybody could read this book and feel the same power of family love and family support, and feel the hurt and the anger, things like that. I would think that those would be universal themes that men or women could either one feel.
I enjoyed it, and I think I have a very profound feminine side. So listen,
well,
we got 60 seconds left. Take 30 of them and tell us, do you think, looking back your own life, you would have done better staying in Alpine or staying in West Texas, being a cowboy?
Well, I wish I had a good answer for that. I've thought about that for forever. And there's been a lot of times when I wished I had stayed and not gone off. Then there's times when I think, well, I did a better thing by going off, particularly in terms of, what I was able to offer my family. But truthfully, I admire Son for being able to know exactly what he wanted, stay in West Texas, do what he wanted, and be just happy as could be doing it. And I wish that I could have done something like that. Whether I would have been able to do it long term, I don't know. I would like to think that I could, because I admire him, but I'm not sure I would have been able to do that.
Well, Tom Hardy, let's wrap it up there. Oh, actually, really quick, one question. You talk in the book about a manly truck. That's what you get when you're in Austin. You get your midlife crisis. What'd you drive here to Marfa?
Well, I actually drove the Pilot out here, but I left my truck at home. I actually bought a midlife crazy red Dodge truck like the character in the book, and I've still got it, and it's over 250,000 miles, and it's running great. Every time I go to the shop, they try to get me to trade it off, and I tell them,
say no way.
No, I say the last drive that thing will make to drive me to the cemetery.
Thank you, Tom Hardy. The book is Slow Moving Dreams. It's a book about West Texas and childhood, and about Tom Hardy. This is KRTS, Marfa Public Radio, 93.5 on your FM dial, and we thank you all for listening.